Hello and welcome to Game Changing with me, Tim Thornton.
And me, Chris Sheldon.
In this podcast, we chat to various luminaries from the music world who we've met along the way.
About those key moments in their careers where the stars aligned and it all started to go right.
The route to becoming a rock producer can sometimes be a familiar story. They get a menial job in a recording studio, they progress up the ladder until they're in charge. Billy Bush's journey is different. Now a trusted pair of hands behind successful albums by the Boxer Rebellion, The Naked and Famous, Grizfolk and the band I play for, Fink, Billy has forged his reputation by being the man who can get his head round the thorniest of logistical challenges in both the live and recorded world. A talent that attracted Billy's most enduring and probably most successful collaborators, Butch Vig and Garbage. Hey, Billy gets on so well with Garbage, he even married one of them. Anyway, eager to find out what makes Billy tick, Chris and I boarded a plane and flew to Los Angeles. I'm joking, of course. We spoke to Billy via the magic of the internet. Hope you enjoy the chat. What I was thinking was that there's two big differences between you and the other producers that we've spoken to. And the first one, which will sort of neatly go to a little potted history of your career, is that you started in the live music world. Am I right? Rather than the recorded music world.
Yeah, I mean, I originally started as a musician, and then as the more professional side of things started as touring as a guitar tech was my first sort of foray into like getting paid to do something musically.
And who was that, the first band you toured with?
The first band I toured with was a band called Danger Danger, which was a late 80s hair metal band out of Long Island, New York.
Okay.
Excellent.
I don't recall their oeuvre.
You would if you really dug into the 80s, because they were called Danger Danger. The record was called Danger Danger.
Nice.
And the big hit was called Bang Bang.
Okay. Nice. Okay. And I know that Hole was a band of yours at one point. Is that right?
Yeah, I toured with them as well. So
Okay.
Long story short, when I was studying music in Denton, Texas, at the University of North Texas, I met a guitar player named Andy Timmons, who's a great, amazing, all-around, just shredding guitar player. And he had gotten a job with playing guitar for Danger Danger. So when they went on tour, he was like, dude, if you want to make some money, come on tour. So I toured with them, and we toured all over for about a year or so. And then that segued into a bunch of other bands just from, you know how it is when you tour. It's like you see people, and then somebody goes like, oh shit, that guy's actually really good at what he does. We should hire him, So like I would always end up getting hired by the headliner. Like whatever band I was working with, I would end up getting hired by the headliner on the next tour.
Oh, sweet.
Because it would see how I was working. So it'd be like I constantly quickly moved up. And I just got known to be able to deal with really complicated and difficult situations.
Mm.
So I toured with Suicidal Tendencies for quite a few years, dealing with the kind of madness that was that sort of scene. And they had the same management company as Hole. So when Hole was starting to kind of blow up and things were getting wildly out of control with them, they called me going like, do you think you can come wrangle this, bizarreness? And I was like, yeah, sure.
Right.
So I started touring with Hole and toured with them for about a year or so.
Because I remember when we were doing one of our two albums with you, Fink's two albums that we did with you, and I was playing, you have I believe it's a Stratocaster.
Yeah.
I can't remember what colour it is, but I'm going to go for turquoise. Is that right?
I do have a turquoise one, yeah. Seafoam green.
Right. I think I was playing that one. And while I was playing it, you said to me, I bought this with the bonus that I got from Hole.
Close.
From the Hole tour.
Close. I got that guitar. It's actually a seafoam green one that Alex Perez at Fender made for me. I'd been working with him with Courtney's guitar tech, whose name is Chad Zamish. We worked with Alex and Fender to create Courtney's signature guitar, because she had this one guitar called a Mercury that Kurt had bought her. It was handmade by some dude in Austin, and she kept throwing it into the crowd during Lollapalooza shows.
Right.
And because she was, in the throes of dealing with having Kurt kill himself and all this crazy shit happening with her, that she wasn't really thinking about these things. But we were like, dude, at some point, you know, or Francis is going to want this guitar, not some fucking punter in you know, the middle of nowhere. So we tried to find a guitar that we could replace it with. And I came up with the idea, because I'd worked with Fender for years, of like, hey, why don't you guys make a version of this? So they did it. And as a result of them doing this guitar and me getting her to actually sign off on it and then being able to make it, Alex was like, dude, do you want anything? I was like, yes, I would like a 60s Seafoam Green Relic Strat. So he made that for me. But the guitar I bought with a tour bonus from Hole, as you can see, I have a guitar problem. If I walked you around the studio, you'd really see how bad my guitar problem is. But I bought an original 62 Strat that B.B. King had signed. So it's a Sunburst one. That was the one that was like, it was at the time, it was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought.
Right.
So,
That's amazing.
yeah.
Cool. Okay. So, and the other name I remember, and I mentioned this to Chris the other day, but we couldn't find any evidence for it online, is Metallica. Did you work with them as well?
Metallica. So my Metallica story is interesting in that as I was telling you before, like whenever we would tour with somebody, or whenever I would tour somebody, like all of a sudden I'd get a call from the headliner. Like, so Suicidal supported Metallica on a bunch of like stadium tours. Same management company, and they loved the Metallica guys because the Metallica guys are really, or the Suicidal guys are really fun to hang out with. And the Metallica guys at the time were really fun to hang out with too, if you know what I mean. So we spent like a good 18 months just constantly just hanging out with the Metallica people. And then I got a call going, hey, Kurt wants you to be his guitar tech. We fly out to San Francisco to meet Kurt and see how things fit. And I was like, cool. So I flew out there, they hung out with him for a couple of days. And then I got a call going, cool, you want to be Kirk's guitar tech? And I was like, sure. And at the time I was on tour with Garbage. And the Garbage tour was supposed to only be 6 weeks. And so this was getting to the end of the 6 weeks tour, and then they got word that it was getting extended. And this was on the very first record, so, you know, things really hadn't started to happen with Garbage.
Right.
And Shirley, of all people, came up to me and was like, I hear you're leaving me. And I was like, oh, man. And she was like, please don't leave. And I was like, oh, fuck, okay. And at this point, there was like, you know, there was nothing between us whatsoever, you know, but I did see that at the time, I knew what Metallica was going to be. I knew Metallica was going to be, if I took the Metallica gig, I was only going to be Kirk's guitar tech, which is a great gig, but that's the ceiling. That's all, you know, I would never get past that. I'd just be a guitar tech. And I had an instinct at the time that I could really fit in with the Garbage crew in a way that would allow me to do more than just be a guitar tech. Already at the time, I was doing a lot more with the band, even though we just started touring. You know, I could tell like they really needed what I could bring to the table technically when it came to like synths and programming and figuring out how to deal with some of the technology that they were wanting to use on tour. And it was right around the time when Sound Tools became Pro Tools. And Butch was really into the idea of exploring digital recording somehow, you know. And so like all these things kind of, you know, came together at a point that made me go like, you know, I think I'm going to bet on this small indie bands from Wisconsin because I feel like there's something, like it's going somewhere that's a lot more interesting than I know what my life is going to be if I go here. I'll end up moving to fucking San Francisco and it would be a great gig. And, you know, coincidentally, the guitar tech from Hole, Chad I was talking about, is James's guitar tech and has been for,
Right.
I don't know, 12 years or something. And it's a great gig, but it's not what I wanted to do because I didn't want to spend the rest of my life just, you know, working on guitars and dealing with all that kind of stuff. So I was like, I wanted to explore being in the studio. And, you know, I got the sense that I would get that opportunity if I stayed in the Garbage camp.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like kind of, it's that thing, I suppose, Chris, when we talked to Flood, he was once saying he could see a certain path.
Well, that's right.
Down the production path because he got as far as he could with engineering, and he was like, "Do I want to be an engineer for the rest of my life?"
Yeah.
Well, that's what he said. It was either carry on being an engineer with U2 or producing. Who was it? Erasure. That's right. As he said, it's like you could be the greatest engineer, but you'll just be the engineer. So, which is fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But
Totally.
You know, he wanted to move on to production.
That's exactly kind of how I felt. I was like, you know, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Although I love touring and I love, you know, the process of making a live show happen. But I knew at the time, like, I really loved the creation of music. Just going back to being a musician
Right.
at the very, very beginning, it's like I like making music and I like the process of it. And I like all the process of, from trying to figure out how to make something sound interesting to figuring out how to make a song work, how to connect to people, how to get performances out of people. Every element of record making I really love. But I also love like the process of seeing what happens when it comes out, on tour.
So at that time, obviously, when Garbage were, because I'm trying to remember back then, and Butch had already sort of made a name for himself as a producer by that point, hasn't he? Pumpkins had come out and Nirvana had happened and all that stuff.
Yeah, so he'd actually done a whole bunch of records before the whole sort of chaos of Nevermind.
Yeah.
And then once the Pumpkins records took off and once Nevermind took off, he, being a drummer and being a musician himself and a songwriter, like he wanted to take some time off and make some music himself. He had gotten sort of burnt out on the process of making records with other people. So it started as just like a side project, sort of like something fun for him and his buddies to do. And then they realized like, oh, this is actually kind of cool and interesting, and we should see where it goes. And I think also a very similar thing was like he knew at the time if he stayed on that path what his life would be. It would just be a constant stream of, how much am I going to get to make this record, and the records that are going to be lucrative are the records I don't want to make, and the records that aren't lucrative are going to be the ones I do want to make.
Yeah.
So, I think he decided like he wanted to commit to being in a band for a minute.
So was there any, when you first started teching with Garbage, did you think at any point I'll be, that the opportunity to work with Butch as an engineer, or, had any of that sort of come up, or it occurred to you, or any of that sort of, or were you?
Well, it occurred to me because I saw gaps in their skill sets that I knew I could fill. And because I'd been a part of enough sort of bands starting to take off and realizing like, in order to keep the momentum going, you have to keep pushing more and more and more. It's sort of exponentially how much effort, work, things that happen. Like, it doesn't organically happen and keep going like this. That's why so many bands like, oh, we have this great first record, and then it drops off.
Right.
So I knew that they'd all been around the block enough. Shirley was in her third band. The dudes in the band were in their third band. They'd all been around the block, multiple labels. They'd seen this sort of stuff before, and they knew what it was going to take to get the second record to be as impactful as the first record. And I knew that in order for them to do that, they were going to have to step up their game in ways that, I don't think even they were aware of at the time. Right. But I knew that my skill set of being able to, get great guitar sounds, come up with new sounds, understand the technology that was coming in like super quick. Like, samplers were changing. Like the first record was done all on analog tape and S1000s. And it was super frustrating for Butch. And then I knew that when we got into the world of digital recording, that was going to open up the possibilities for what he wanted to do and what the rest of the band wanted to do in ways that even they couldn't really fathom at the time, but I could see it. I could see like where, oh, okay, you want to. It's sort of like watching somebody, work on a sculpture and realizing, oh, okay, actually, these are the tools you need. I need to put these tools in your hand, and then you'll understand how to finish what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Like I could see what they were trying to do, and understand what we needed to do to be able to facilitate that in a creative and interesting way. So. It even started back when we were on tour and everybody first got their first laptops, and like not really understanding how to get online back in those days, like, in the AOL sort of dial-up days. And I'd be the guy that they would always call going like, I can't get this to work. And I would always solve it. And then so on the tail end of the Garbage tour, the first Garbage tour, Butch, took me aside and was like, hey, I want you, because you understand all this stuff, to go research what all the sort of digital recording systems are and figure out which one's the best one. Go buy it. I don't care what it costs. Figure out how to use it, and then bring it to Smart and show us how to use it. I was like, wow, okay, that sounds like right up my alley.
Did you go for Sound Tools?
Well, that was at the point when I had heard that Sound Tools had switched over to Pro Tools. And coincidentally, I had reached out. I can't remember how I actually got a hold of somebody, but I got a hold of somebody at Digidesign at the time who was a huge fan. And they were like, come out to San Francisco. Let me show you what we're working on. It's not quite done yet, but I think it will serve what you're trying to accomplish. And so it was like the first iteration of, Pro Tools as we know it. It still was new bus chassis and all that sort of old school sort of version, but it had translated into a version that seemed like, okay, this doesn't seem so kludgy and difficult to use that it will put people off, So I was like, this looks like this could actually be something that we could creatively use. So that ended up being like, I tried that one. I tried Performer, Opcode, Studio Vision.
Yeah, no, I remember all those. I remember running Opcode with Cubase and trying to get the whole thing working, and it was a fucking nightmare.
Yeah,
all that stuff.
And that was the thing too, because I also realized that these guys are guys that don't have a lot of patience on like things not working. So having to figure out solutions to that would do what we wanted to do, but be stable, be repeatable, and not get in the way of the creative process. Were things that I was like, okay, like Opcode's, Studio Vision Pro, I really loved a lot of the stuff it could do, but it couldn't do a lot of the editing stuff that Pro Tools could do in the same sort of way. But the way the MIDI was great in it. So at one point, like I had that going, slave to a Pro Tools machine, slave to two, 24-track machines, and
oh my god, man. There was that kind of crossover period, and it
totally.
was, oh man, it was so difficult.
It was a nightmare, and you never knew why it would not work.
Yeah.
Like one moment you'd be like, oh, it's working great, flawlessly, and nothing would change, and then the next thing you know, like, why is everything out of sync again?
Oh
like,
man, I know.
Nobody touched anything. It's like, it was just, I don't know. It got to a point where when I finally got so frustrated with the micro links that I literally took it, ripped it out of the machine room, drug it outside to the deck, and then threw it off our balcony into the street, so it exploded in the street. Because it was just one of those things where, like, okay, if it's not working, I'm going to fucking destroy it, so we have to replace it.
Yeah. It did get to that point, didn't it, with stuff? And it's looking back now and trying to explain to people, I remember when I decided to make the change to just use Pro Tools, and it was like, okay, forget the tape thing. And it was just like nirvana. It was heaven, just suddenly, all right, yeah, I'm dealing with it. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, that was the thing too. Like, I was always trying to figure out like what the best version of things were. And, for us, like tape was always a bit of a sacrifice. Cause like, I know a lot of people really romanticize the sound of tape, and it does a thing. But at the time when you're trying to make something be exactly what you put in, like it would always come back and like, oh, the transients aren't quite right. All of a sudden it's a little thicker, and that's really clouding up where the guitars are landing now. And so we had all these things. And then at the same time, when Pro Tools started to become more stable and usable as a multi-track sort of device and recording mechanism, I would get tape in and be like, oh, this tape is fucking terrible. It's like, it's shedding all over the place, and it doesn't sound particularly great. It's like, it's fucking, like the formulations of it all started to really kind of like go downhill.
Do you know what's really funny, Billy, as well, is that people who actually did work on tape, like yourself and like me, and, and half the people that have been in the podcast, are the ones that if anybody says, so hey, would you want to go back? I'm like, no,
fuck no,
I want to do that. And yet all the young engineers are like, God, it must have been great. I'm like, you have no idea. What you don't realize, it was all we had. That's why we worked on it. And as soon as we could not work on it, it was good times.
Yeah, it's like everything we did was to try to mitigate what was the downside of using it. So it's like, oh fuck, yeah, like the idea of like I still get bands that go like, hey, can we track the tape? I'm like, you're not good enough to track the tape. It's like you have to be so good, because it's like, I'm not gonna window edit your fucking drums. I'm over it. It's like, well, can we just hit tape and dump it in Pro Tools?
Yes, yeah. But I was going to say, actually, that the second difference between you and everyone else was that you maybe started your recording career in digital as opposed to all these other guys who started in tape. And we have stories like Tim Palmer buying his first Pro Tools rig and
Yeah.
trying to work out how to use it, and then shaking his head and going, "Nah, it's not for me."
Yeah, well, what Tim did was he went down to see the Sound Tools guys when it was still Sound Tools.
Yeah.
They invited him down when he was working in Hollywood. Can't remember what record he was working on, but he said, and he went down to try it, and he went, yeah, I don't think so, and went back to using tape for about another 3 or 4 years before it, he was suddenly, oh yeah, okay, I get it now, I'm moving on. But at the time, he was on. I mean, I remember buying my first Pro Tools rig and trying to figure it out, and it's just like, there was no one really knew. There weren't many of them around. In studios used to rent them out at incredibly high rates, so you had to kind of sink or swim, just buy it and get involved,
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that because, like, I kind of feel like I started in the actual engineering side of things and with both things happening. Because at the time, like, even though I did get the Pro Tools rig, we didn't really trust it.
Okay.
So we were doing everything to tape, It was like I would, if we got something where it was like, okay, this is kind of difficult, let's edit these drums or these drum loops, we'd fly it into Pro Tools, and then I would edit it, and then I'd fly it back to tape. So the entire time, like version 2.0, we mixed it off of tape. We had, it was on 48 tracks of analog, plus I had, I think, 24 tracks coming out of Pro Tools all when we mixed it. But, it's like, it was only like sort of special effects stuff like that. Like if we were doing vocal comps, we'd fly the vocals in to, we track the vocals in Pro Tools, comp them, and then fly them back into the tape machine. And then we printed everything to half inch. I mean, even that's one of my quarantine gigs is going through lots of these guys, baking them and transferring them, right? So, I mean, this one is even from, when's this one from? Yeah, 2004.
So this is in the podcast style. We should probably explain what we're looking at. Billy's holding up
a half-inch tape box.
Yeah, you guys describe it. Cause
a half-inch analog tape. There it is. Wow, I actually haven't seen one of those for a long time.
Come to my garage. I've got plenty.
So is that a version 2.0 one?
No, that one actually is from the fourth record, from Bleed Like Me.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because, like, at that time, like from 95 to 2005, like the process of how we would finish records changed. Like, during version 2.0, everything was tracked, ended up being, we quickly realized that tracking into Pro Tools was really worked for our workflow. Butch didn't really trust it so much. And also he couldn't wrap his head around at the time, like mixing in Pro Tools because automation was so rudimentary. Not like automation wasn't rudimentary on the Harrison that we had. I mean, we had flying faders and that was it. Nothing else was recallable. Everything else was by hand. But he loved how the Harrison sounded. So, we ended up mixing everything out of, like I said, off of analog tape, out of Pro Tools, and then mixing it to half inch. And we mixed everything to half inch for the first 12 years of the band, just because there was no other way of mixing anything. It's like, it's either DAT, at the time, or it was going to be, half inch. Mm-hmm. And, we didn't really trust, like at the time, like going back into Pro Tools was, it was 16-bit.
Yeah.
It was the black 888s or whatever. And then it turned into the 88824s towards the end of version 2.0. But we didn't start printing back into the box until the fourth record. So it's kind of interesting. I'm doing a weird sort of test between the mixes that we printed in the box in 2004 versus like taking that exact same session and printing it in the box in 2020 and then doing like all the different permutations of this mix. Like, okay, now what if I run it through my analog summing system? What does that sound like? And then compare all these things to the half inch. Just because I have that kind of time right now.
Exactly. Just moving on from Garbage, Billy, I was going to say that there's a point from a sort of an observer where you started doing a whole bunch of other bands as a producer. Is that because Garbage sort of wound up for a while, or was that a sort of actual intention on your part? Like, I've got to get some other names under my belt.
Both things. I mean, the band took a hiatus in 2005, and Butch went back to work as a producer, and I started working with him on a lot of things as an engineer. And again, I think I saw this sort of thing like, well, I could either stay here and it's very lucrative being an engineer at this point. In 2005, I was like, people didn't mind paying for studio time, didn't mind paying for engineers. But I also saw that, again, there's a ceiling. I'm going to be Butch's engineer, and that's going to be it. And it's working for somebody like Butch. It's a double-edged sword because, on one hand, the education I got from him and the opportunities I got from working with him have been extraordinary.
Yes.
In fact, like when he first decided that I was going to engineer version 2.0, he was like, I'm going to teach you everything I know about recording, and you teach me everything you know about this Pro Tools rig. And it's been, an incredible education working with him. And, I love him and he's fantastic to work with. But I knew that like, okay, that's going to be the ceiling. If I want to do anything else, which I did, I wanted to branch off into production and branch off into mixing, I would have to go do that outside of the umbrella of him.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's difficult sometimes when you work with somebody like that is everything is attributed to him,
Sure.
and rightfully so in some regards. But as it's like it's never one person, particularly within a band or in a situation like that. It's never just the producer. It's never just the songwriter. It's like it's a combination of things. It's the alchemy of all the people that are involved in it.
Yeah.
So I was like, I have to get out from underneath this, he's Butch Vig's guy.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And I had to go out and do stuff that was completely different from all the other music that we'd worked on, simply because I was just being known as that guy. I'm that engineer.
Yeah.
So
do you have a record which you think which you look back on and think, right, that was the sort of time when I really got my own identity and my own shit together?
No, I mean, I feel like, like in carving out a name for myself individually, like I would say like the Naked and Famous track Youngblood was the first one where it started to reach out to people who didn't know who Garbage was or didn't know who Butch was. It was a younger group of A&R people who, were in a different musical sort of sphere than what we had existed in. So I started to be able to create my own name because of the success of that track to branch out and get other opportunities of other things. And that would be the one track where I was like, okay, that was a lucky break, and that because it did really well and created a lot of awareness that, and it was nothing like anything I'd done before. So it was sort of like the jumping off point to start producing and mixing other things. I'd done a bunch of other stuff before that, but none of it had really impacted and nobody really cared,
Right.
So,
okay.
But that was the first one where all of a sudden, like, then people started like asking, for me. And then from that point on, I was like, I always tried to find stuff that was different and unique that I really sort of connected with. Like when I got approached by Finn about like, hey, let's, can we have a chat about making a record? It's like, I'd love to, I want to do something with Ethan, but I can't afford him.
Right.
So I was like, cool, man, if I can be the budget version of Ethan Johns, I am down. But it was also interesting because it was like, I'd engineered a bunch of other stuff here in LA that, was really interesting and cool. And was like, it was in the more acoustic and organic sort of mode. And I liked where Fink was going in, still being very organic and real, but bringing in other elements of things. And I was like, okay, so this is really interesting and really fascinating. And, those records are another pair of records which, created an awareness that I'm not just, the indie rock guy or the alternative rock guy or the 90s guitar dude or whatever.
Yeah, definitely. I've also picked up on Grizz Folk.
Yeah.
Which I hadn't heard of before.
Yeah.
But I liked it. I played it today, and I
yeah, me too. I was listening to that as well today.
And I kind of think to myself that it's got a kind of Billy Bush sound to it. When I A/B that with Hard Believer, it's kind of there are similarities in some way.
Yeah, I mean that was another case where that band's a real unique group of guys. Like there's three real sort of rootsy Americana dudes in it, and then there's two Swedes who are very much the Max Martin sort of like electronic, modern production sort of thing.
Yeah.
They're all super, super talented dudes, super sweet dudes. And that record was one where I got called in to help finish it because they were really struggling with the direction. They were on a major label. They were on Virgin here in the States. and they were Ron Fair's sort of like, he wanted to make them Maroon 5, and they had no interest whatsoever in being Maroon 5.
Sure.
You know, no disrespect to Maroon 5, but it's, you know, they wanted to be themselves. And he was all about, like, he wanted to be super pristine. He wanted Chris Lord-Alge to mix it, and they spent a fucking shitload of money on this. And then the band was just like, we don't like it. So they called me, being the budget Ethan Johns, and they were like, we don't have much money, but can you help us finish this record? And I did. So it was like, I ended up doing like, I can't remember, 6 or 8 songs on that record, reproduced some of the songs that Ron Fair had done with Chris, and then remixed a few things, and then also produced, I think, 6 or something like that. But it was an interesting process, because it was kind of like the first time I'd come across a younger group of musicians who were of like this time frame, where all music is available to all people at all times, and everybody has got, you know, influences that run the gamut. You know, it's like there's no problem with you loving the most pop music, but also, you know, loving the most organic, you know, down home rootsy sort of music in the world, and jazz and hip hop, and, you know, you name it, metal. Like, they had all these influences. You know, like the guitar player, you know, from Grisfolk, like, he could play anything. Like, you know, like, he could play Swedish death metal. And at the same time, like, he really understood, like, you know, modern pop chord structures. You know, so it's like, it was like an encyclopedic knowledge of music. And, you know, that was an interesting project of a band where back in the day, if they had been on a label that really cared about them and really gave them time and would like let them go out on tour and really figure out what the sound of the band is, you know, I think they would be in a place where they were, you know, doing something really extraordinarily unique. Because I do think that like what they do is so different, but how they can discover what it is that they all really connect with and put that out as the kind of thing where it's like, you know, you can only really do that by being a band and being committed to being in a band for a long, long period of time. You know? And of course, you can't afford to do that anymore.
They certainly seem to have used Spotify to their advantage, though, because I mean, their play counts on Spotify are pretty massive for that.
Yeah, millions.
Yeah. But that's, you know, that's also the, you know, the byproduct of the world that they live in now. It's like, you know, because there's so many influences in it, and the songs do kind of cover a lot of different territories, that, you know, they do fall in a lot of different sort of playlists.
Sure. We just going back to doing those 2 records with you. I mean, that for us, we look back on that as a kind of era, a total era of Fink, where we did the 2 LA records, and you introduced us to so many things about doing these things in LA, like from the community of sort of session people that you had at your fingertips. You know, you want someone to come and play this, I can get them, and to also right down to the food we ordered. You know, and it's such a lovely experience doing those records. You know, and then being able to come back to LA and play a gig. You know, when we did El Rey on the Hard Believer tour, you know, that it was so nice, and we've got a different setup now, you know, Finn's in Berlin and so on, but we do look back on that period and like, you know, maybe we should just go and do a record like that again.
Well, I mean, you know? there is something to be said, like, you know, we live in such a weird time where everybody is so disparate, and there's so little money in the music business as it is. Like, trying to convince people to spend money on anything is difficult, you know, because it's like, oh, well, I've only got $10,000 to make a record, and I need to eat and survive and pay my rent until we go on tour in 3 months. So it's like they need the $10,000 in order to survive. Whereas, you know, back in the day, it's like there is a magic. I do think that there's a magic, and I've always said this about when you get musicians in a room and you put them in a room that hopefully it's also inspiring in itself. You know, that's the beauty of LA and these studios that still exist, thank God, that, you know, you go like, there's been magic that's made in this, you know, room. It's like, you know, you go to like Sunset and you're like, well, you know, Van Halen 1 and 2 were done in this room, you know, Prince worked in that room, you know, Adele worked in this
It's
room.
inspiring. It's inspiring for people to step into that. There's no doubt about it. You know?
Yeah, it's like, you know, Sinatra was here, and, you know, the Beach Boys were there, and the Beatles were here, and the Stones were there, and it's like, so there's a history that I think does make people kind of sit up and, like, you know, dig in a little bit harder than they do if they're sitting at home in their pajamas, like trying to do something. You know, nothing against that. You know, music should be made any number of ways, any which way. There's no right way. But I do feel like the whole thing about music for me is like the community of it, like the whole sort of communal element of it, of, you know, it should be played in front of people. You know, it's like, yeah, it's great to listen to. You put a great record on, and, you know, really what it's doing is transporting you into the place where everybody is when they listen to that record, you know? So I think that when you take that and that mindset, and you put a bunch of musicians in a room and you let them create and be musicians, there's something magic that happens, you know? And that's one of the things, like with the Fink records we did, that I love, like, you know, when I was first talking about budgets and stuff like that, I'm like, well, we could go do this. If we want to be economical, what we should do is just go do all the drums, and then we'll come over here and we'll do the bass and the guitars and the vocals. And Finn was adamant about, like, no, I want to be somewhere for the entire duration. I'm like, whew, okay, that's gonna cost some money. But since then, I've also really, really pushed to always, whenever I do work with a band, to have everybody there all the time and not track it like so it's just drums.
Yeah.
You know, so the drummer gets beat to hell for, you know, the first week, and then he doesn't have fuck all to do for the rest of it. And then
we talked about that before, I think, and Tim and I have talked about this. When I've been producing bands myself, I try to do that always. It's like I'll do maybe 2 or 3 tracks with the drums, and then we'll do some bass and guitars and what have you on them, and then we'll go back and do some more drums. The idea to me now of doing like 12 tracks of drums and then 12, you know, tracks of bass, it's so boring for everybody, you know. And then once the drummer's done his 12 tracks, he's like, well, now what do I do, you know? And it's horrible. I love the idea of just working on the tracks, you know, 2 or 3 at a time. And then, and also if something's not happening, and you know what it's like, you know, sometimes the singer's not feeling it or the guitar player's not feeling it. It's like, all right, well, let's do some more drums. Let's do something else. You know, it gives you that option.
But that's the luxury of all being in one place for a
well, that's right.
time, though, isn't it? You know, and that was amazing as well. Getting out of your hometown, going to one place. Right, we're going to be here for 2 weeks or 3, and you can work really quickly. I mean, people. You know, Billy, when we say to people that we did Hard Believer in 17 days, I think it was. Yeah. People are like, really? And we're like, well, yeah, but then we didn't do anything else. Yeah. You know, we literally, that was all we did. We got up, walked to the studio, picked up a Starbucks, and then just worked. And that was all we did.
And also, it wasn't like it was 17 days of 20-hour days either. It was like, it was pretty civilized, if I recall. You know, it's like 10 hours tops, probably, maybe 12 occasionally. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the latest night was... was just because we'd had too many donuts, probably. And just
moving a little slower,
Yeah, carrying on. So, no, it's fantastic.
But I mean, that's to get back to that, though, it's like that's one thing, like when I have the opportunity, I mean, I like to work on a song a day, you know, and like try to do it, you know, get as much of it done as I possibly can. Maybe not finish vocals, or maybe not everything, like all the sprinkles done, but, you know, try to like do a song a day so that way everybody's involved. And then and then if you do hit a wall where you're like, oh, the arrangement's not working, this part's not working, then it's like you could punt off to another song and go like, let's do the next song, and then we'll circle back. And that way, I mean, for me, it's like if I can keep everybody in the band involved on a daily basis, which is weird because like I've got some bands who don't want to do that. They're like, I want to get all my stuff done, and I'm like,
right,
yeah.
I know you do, and you want to go hang out, but that's not, to me, that's not going to make the best record. You know, it's like,
sure, yeah.
But,
so is that how Garbage works still? Do they record like a band?
No, they work in a completely bizarre way. Like every day is a weird sort of like, what are we gonna do? I don't know. Right. What do you want to do? I don't know. Should we go to lunch? I don't know. What do you want to do? This record was kind of conceived in a different way. Like they wanted to do something different, like do the writing differently. So Steve, one of the guitar players in the band, his in-laws have got like a house in Palm Springs. So the band were like, well, can we just go record there? And I was like, yeah, but I can't take the whole studio there. So it's like, we can't take all the nuts and bolts and every single thing that's in here there and set it up for a couple weeks of recording. So what I did was I built a really, really minimal recording system for them. And we just set it up in this big like living room in this house. You know, it's on a golf course. It's got a pool. It's gorgeous. And it was like, you know, and they would just kind of sit around and just start jamming, which they don't do. They don't really jam. Like most of the times things would come from like, oh, I've got this loop idea or this chord progression idea. And this was all sort of like, you know, they kind of get together and then somehow something would start happening and it would become this thing. And then Shirley would just write over it. And so we did these really long stream of consciousness sort of songs that were like, you know, 10, 20 minutes long, where she would just continue to write while the band continued to vamp on whatever they were working on. And we did this like twice for a total of probably like a month, like 2 weeks at a time. And then we sort of went away, and then Duke for the most part, and Butch to a certain degree, like went through all these sort of jams and sort of like started to cut them up into an element of some sort of arrangement. And then they sort of morphed out of that. Like we would get together for a couple of weeks and then start working on something, and the arrangement would completely change. Everything would change about it, the tempo, the key, the vocals and everything like that. But all the core of it was started from this whole writing process. But every time they come in, it's a completely different, you know, thing. Like, I don't know at any point what's going to happen.
Yeah. And has your role, because I noticed that you went from engineering and you gradually sort of then you got co-production credit to you actually produced one of them, right?
Yeah, it's like
actually you're named as the sole,
not the sole producer, but like I'm the sole mixer on the last two Garbage records.
Right. So I mean, has that just been like organic?
Yeah.
Or has there been a moment where they've gone, right, Billy, this one we think you should take more of a
No, I think the way it's just sort of evolved in that, you know, the way the ideas flow becomes like everybody feels like they can have an idea about any sort of thing. So as a result, like, you know, for the additional production and the production elements of the last couple of records, it's been because I've come up with something. You know, it's like I've either come up with a drum loop or a sound or you know, an effect thing or some arrangement thing or some element of the production of it where that you know, I'm involved with it as, you know, as a part of the team. And when it comes to the mixing, it's like, I think Butch has appreciated not having to, you know, really have to do the heavy lifting of the mixing side of things. Like he enjoys the fact that, you know, because collectively we get it to a place where it starts to feel and make sense. You know, like I'll do rough mixes as we go, and everything is always working in a place of sort of like, you know, as far complete as we can possibly get it. You know, it's like, it's very rarely something is a complete mess and we don't know what it sounds like. It's like normally like you really know what it's going to sound like.
You're editing as you go along.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're editing, we're mixing, we're curating it as we go along. And therefore, when it comes to the mix element of it, you know, Butch, you know, I think enjoys not having to completely reset his mind on what it sounds like, and instead just can react to what it sounds like when I send the mixes. So like I'll do a mix, they'll either come in and listen and have notes, or I'll send it off and wait for notes to come back. And then, you know, Butch is the one who gets really meticulous about, you know, certain elements of things, but everybody weighs in on the whole process. But it's, you know, it's funny because like when it comes to credits, like it's really just a collaborative, you know, thing.
I noticed one thing as well, Billy, that you tend to do a lot of, or you have done anyway, a lot of just sort of straight engineering gigs, it looks like, as well. So you'll intersperse with doing production and mixing, and then just like a regular kind of engineering gig rather than the other two.
I've always kind of like delineated the three sort of, you know, elements of record making as different. It's different things in my mind, and I use different sides of my brain for all of them.
Right.
Like I love just doing an engineering gig because it's just, I don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
It's just pure creativity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah. I mean, it's because I did one myself last year when I worked on the Rocket Man, album, the soundtrack for the Rocket, and I was just employed as an engineer, and I hadn't done it for years actually.
Yeah.
And it was a friend of mine who was producing it, Giles Martin. He said, "Look, I'm recording. It's all live bands playing, piano, bass, drums, guitar." And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And I hadn't really thought about it, and I hadn't done it for somebody else for years. But you know what? I had a blast, man. It was the most fun because all your job is to make it sound great, and then you sit around, and it's brilliant. It's really fun.
Yeah, no, I got lucky in that I got called to work on the last Paul McCartney record.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about
Great,
this.
great.
Yeah, and it was from a friend of mine, Greg Kirsten, who I've worked with in the past, and he's like an old really great friend of me and Cheryl's, and fucking monster musician and monster producer. Like he's just it's great seeing his career just absolutely explode. But he called me up one day and was like, "Hey, I'm making this record. Do you want to come engineer it? It's this bass player from Liverpool. I think he's pretty good." And I was like, "Okay." And he'd call me in because he has his own team of engineers that he uses on a daily basis because he's constantly always working. But he occasionally calls me in for these sessions that are outside of their sort of comfort zone. And this was going to be one where it was like it's a really big session. He wants to track live. He's got his band there. He's got everything, there's harpsichords, there's harmoniums, there's uprights, there's tack pianos, there's grand pianos, there's acoustics. You don't know what he's going to do in any given moment. So everything has to be ready to go. Everything has to sound good. And you have to be ready to record anything at any given time, judging from where, Paul goes in the room. It's like, oh shit, he's over there. Okay, get ready to record that,
Right.
And it was just, again, just so much fun because it's just, you get to experiment with the whole process of like, oh shit, okay. Like nobody's judging you on anything other than does it sound cool?
Yeah,
know?
Sure. How many tracks was it?
I ended up engineering, and again, it's like one of those things where they did it over so many, dates. So I did the dates here that were here at Henson Studios, the big recording dates that were here at Henson Studio. There were 2 big blocks of it. And then they would go back to Paul's studio in the UK and work on stuff. And then they would come back and do, some pickup dates here, and then would go back. And so it was done over a course of a year, but the bulk of the recording, I think I did like 8 or 10 songs on that record.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, and again, like everything changes. Like, so we go record the basics and then they go back and rework on stuff and tweak stuff and change stuff and whatever.
Yeah.
But
how was Abe Laboriel Jr.?
Oh, I love Abe. I've done quite a few sessions with Abe over the year. He's amazing.
He is so amazing.
He just pointed mic in his direction and it just sounds good.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what the mic is. Just like, yeah.
He's amazing live as well. We went to see Paul McCartney play in Liverpool a couple of Christmases ago.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. But Abe Laboriel, he's so amazing to watch live because he's always doing. Even when he's not drumming, he's like doing something. He's singing or playing percussion or just even dancing.
And and again, like everybody in his band too they're just super lovely people,
Yeah. Well, they've been together a while now. This must be the longest running band he's ever had.
It is, yeah. He was saying that during the time. He was like, "Hey, my band's been together longer than the Beatles."
Sure. Wow, that's cool. That's really good.
Yeah.
Worked with. And was he all right himself? Did you get
amazing
a good impression from him?
Yeah, Shirley was like, man, you're just like love struck with him. And now he's amazing. Aside from the fact like, you don't get a chance to work with people like that very often, but he's just an amazing cat. Like his energy is amazing. At the time he was 72 and he would only work from 12 till 6. Like he would show up bang on the dot at 12 o'clock and roll out at 6. And it was amazing how much shit we got accomplished in those 6 hours. Because he was just so focused, so talented, so quick. He's a badass drummer himself.
Well, what was his famous quote, wasn't it? When Ringo was voted the greatest drummer in the world in some poll, he goes, he's not even the greatest drummer in the Beatles.
That's classic. Yeah. Awesome.
Oh, man.
Well, that's great. Well, that's amazing. What a cool thing. I was listening to some outtakes from the Abbey Road album where they're doing the Ballad of John and Yoko, and it's just Paul playing drums on the stuff, and he's a great drummer, man. He really fantastic.
Yeah, I was like, is there anything this guy can't do? He was playing congas, and I was like, fucking hell.
Chris, you should say why you're being a bit modest about why you were listening to the Abbey Road.
Well, all it was just we were just mixing the outtakes, and it was Giles rang me up and just said, "Look, just mix the outtakes." But the reason we were doing it was because it was for the B-side stuff, but it was the we wanted to keep as much of the chat that there was happening between the takes. That was the point. And so
cool.
so there was loads of stuff. So listening to the four of them talking on the floor of Abbey Road 2 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it was 50 years ago. That's what's incredible. And they sound so youthful. And, and they're chatting amongst themselves going, I don't know, what's, and Paul's going, well, what are you saying there? And they're talking about Come Together, I think it is. And
right.
John's going, well, it is what it is, man. Sort of fuck off. I like it. And he's like, all right, whatever. And
whatever.
And occasionally you hear him go, what do you think, George? And he'll be like, I think it's great, lads, sort of thing. It's so fantastic to listen to. It was a real treat,
that's amazing.
Actually.
That says everything about like where you want to be, at that point in your life. It's like, for me, watching Paul play bass at 72 years old and watching the enthusiasm at which he attacked it, like standing up, playing it like he's a 19-year-old, with as much love as this is my first recording date ever. I'm fucking so excited. And I'm like, he's made more records than I will ever make.
He's still into it.
And he's got this much enthusiasm. He's got this much excitement about it. And I'm like, that is a place to be. If you're going to be making music, to have that kind of love and enthusiasm for something is fucking incredible.
Yeah. Guys, I was going to say, should we do the level 42 question and then wrap up?
Sure.
We haven't really followed the pattern as usual, Billy. We've just chatted, which is great. But
no, it's been awesome.
But we do have this silly question that we ask people.
Sure.
Which is, do you know much about Level 42, the band?
Not much.
Okay. Well, the reason why we mentioned them is because in the early 80s, they were a kind of touring jazz funk band. They were doing okay. And they got to a certain point where I think they were playing, nice theatre tours and so on. And they said to each other, right, lads, if this is going to continue, we've got to hit pay dirt. So we've got to deliberately write some hit singles. So we've got to go out with the express intention, from the writing process to the production process, everything is going to be geared towards having some whopping great smashes. And they did that, and they succeeded, and then they went up to arena level, and it all went really well. And so the level 42 question is, do you believe, I know it worked for them, but do you believe in such an approach?
Well, I think the thing is that it kind of depends on whether it's really honest from the person who's, making it. I do think like they're obviously like living in LA. It's like, this is the hotbed of where people write hit songs every day. It's like, there's a whole process. There's whole, teams and mechanisms in place to crank out hit songs.
Yeah.
And the problem to me is like, so much of it sounds the same. It's all very derivative. It's all very similar. I think that getting a song that fits into those playlists isn't as difficult as it used to be. But it's not necessarily going to create a career. Like Level 42, by doing that, they ended up creating a career. They may have been, their albatross may be these songs which maybe they don't like so much.
Yes.
And if you look at the history of, a number of different artists over the years, like a lot of them have done that, like had a song where it's like, fuck, I really don't want to have to do this song, but it's my hit.
Yeah.
But, I think that to me, for most musicians to go out there and try to create a hit inherently creates a mindset of like, I need to be derivative of what's happening now. And the problem is, by the time it's done, it comes out, now it's going to be old, and it's derivative, and it's not honest, and it's not truthful anymore. So you run the risk of that when you're in that sort of mindset of like, I need to create a hit. I think the way to approach it is to like go, is what I'm saying universal? Does it how do I make what I want to say connect to as many people as humanly possible? And that's, I think, where you can actually maybe end up with a hit that's really honest and truthful. Where it's like you're going, okay, I need to make this not only musically but lyrically and melodically something that people can understand. So I can't make it so obtuse musically or sonically that people won't want to listen to it, but I need to make something that is going to have a universal theme and connectivity that is going to make it be something that everybody can understand. And a lot of times people dumb down when they do that. But if you don't dumb down, I think you have the opportunity to create something of incredible worth and meaning, you know. But again, to me also, like I say this to everybody I work with, like, well, what the fuck is a hit?
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like, when you're telling me it's like you need to have a hit, what does that mean? Oh, it needs to get played on the radio. Well, what radio?
Yeah, true.
You know, it's like look at what hip hop does. Like hip hop can be wildly abstract, completely out there. Like look at Kendrick Lamar's records. It's like his records are extremely musically deep and don't necessarily have hooks, you know. So they don't fall into the idea of like a hit song, but yet he's fucking streamed like crazy, you know?
Yeah.
So is that what you want to do? You can make you can make any music you want to if you can just connect to people.
Right.
So, but yeah, so I think like, you know, the idea of like sitting down to write hit songs in this day and age, I don't think exists because I think there's just too much shit out there of people doing the same exact shit that is, you know, inherently kind of boring and inherently sort of like fast food. You know, it's like, you know, it's like this pop singer singing these songs about going out and having fun and how hot my friends are and, you know, and just rinse and repeat. You know, it's amazing. Like when you really look at like, you know, like what the top 100 songs are on Spotify or on Apple Music or whatever, and you start like, if you just quickly flick between them all, you're like, they all like, oh, right now we're all starting with an acoustic steel string guitar. Oh no, actually now it's a nylon string guitar. Oh no, actually now it's a piano. Oh, now it's actually an electric piano. You know? And of course now everybody's like, I want to make a record like Billie Eilish. I want everything to be really quiet. I want to sing really silently. But, you know, that's not honest to who you are.
I was talking about that with somebody the other day because her brother, who won a Grammy for the production of the record, and that's fine, and that's, you know, it's the record is cool and everything. But there was this whole thing about, you know, it's so great, and they made it in his bedroom. And I was thinking, so is the next step then that people are going to say, right, I want to work with so-and-so, but we've got to work in his bedroom. You know, it's just like, it's super important that if we're going to make a record like Billie Eilish, we have to do it in a bedroom. You know, it's we
have to buy that house.
Yeah.
And work in
do you know what I mean?
bedroom.
It's just like, well, what kind of bed did he have? Okay, let's get that, you know.
Actually, you know what? I found out the Bed Bath & Beyond duvet is the secret.
Yeah,
not the one from
exactly.
Target, Bed Bath & Beyond. And it has to be a certain, you know. And that's the thing is like, you know, I think that the, you know, he's an incredibly talented producer and she's obviously an incredibly gifted singer. And I have been lucky that they've been able to be so homeschooled. So they've been able to study music, again, you know, in a way that most people don't get to. You know, so they've been able to spend 8 hours a day just studying music and playing and practicing and trying and working on their craft. And it's shown in this record, you know, and that's great. And hopefully, you know, they'll be able to continue and there won't be another case of, you know, here's an act that really shouldn't have gotten really big when she was 17.
Yeah.
Because now she's 25 and it's got nowhere to go, you know?
Yes. Right. Yeah, I agree.
But I think that, you know, to me, it's like, I've always said this too, it's like, there's an infinite number of ways of making records. And, you know, CeeLo Green did it with that huge hit that he did with Danger Mouse, right? It's like that vocal was recorded in a bedroom. The, you know, the Naked and Famous track, Youngblood, was recorded in a bedroom, you know? It's like, it's fine. You can record anything anywhere and make it sound cool, make it sound interesting if it's honest. And that's the thing about the record. It's like, it's honest and it's like, it feels, you understand where she's coming from. So that's where to me where the hit comes from. It's like, you know, it's like, are you able to say something in a way that everybody in the world is going to be like, oh yeah, you're speaking to me.
Yeah.
You know?
She seems to have her head screwed on anyway, because she, right down to the things she said about her appearance and so on as well. They seem to come from quite a kind of sensible and also quite nicely stubborn place as well.
Yeah.
You know, when she says things like, well, I don't want to get judged on my appearance.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wear this and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think, you know, I hope, you know, it's always difficult though. It's like, I mean, I can't even imagine what it must be like to be 17 and be going through that kind of ride, you know, or 18 now. So it's like, I mean, it was enough of a mindfuck for the people I was around who were in their 30s,
right?
You know, or 40s when massive success hit. Like when Shirley was 30 was when she was on the cover of like every magazine when you walk through the airport,
sure.
You know? And that was like, that's a lot for a 30-year-old to process who's already been through 3 bands, let alone a 17-year-old where it's like you can't leave the house without everybody knowing who you are, you know? So what happens invariably with people like this, you know, it's like somebody's going to decide that they're no longer the cool thing. And when they decide to do that and they start taking pot shots at her, you know, where does that go? You know, and where the expectations of like, well, what happens to the next record? What happens, you know, when people invariably move on, you know, it's like, or do they? Or do they come up with a second record, which is fantastic? I hope they do, but you know, I always get concerned when it's really young people like that, because you know, history has shown us that it doesn't really work out very often for them.
Yeah, that's true.
From Justin Bieber to, you know, you name it, go down the list. You know,
the successful ones always seem to change.
Yeah, totally.
They seem to think, right, I've done that, so I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah.
Like Arctic Monkeys, you know, they sort of say, right, we've made that album, now it's time to move on, rather than remaking the same record.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so, because as you said, Billy, I mean, at 17 or 18 or whatever she is now, as well as being judged on her music, she's judged on everything she does, whether she dates someone or whatever, you know. But I sort of agree with you, Tim. It would be nice. I mean, obviously the songwriting's really interesting.
Yeah,
her and her brother work really well together, clearly.
Yeah,
but it'd be interesting to see them do something different, you know, or different instruments or something else. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, I thought that the what they did with the Bond theme was a good sort of like, oh, okay, cool. That's not.
I agree.
That showed some, you know, some depth and something like, okay, cool. You're doing something a little bit different from what I would have expected you have done. So
yeah,
and it felt pretty legit. So,
and that's coming from someone who's worked on a Bond theme.
That's true.
Anyway, Billy, maybe we should stop. But it's lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. No, it was really lovely to chat with you guys. It's nice to finally meet you, Chris.
Yeah, and you, Billy. Really nice to meet you, man. It was great. I really enjoyed it. And, you know, if I do get a chance to come over to LA again anytime soon, I'll come and say hi.
Sounds good. And if I get over there anytime soon?
Oh, please. Yeah, it would be great.
Yeah.
It would be great. But, you know, who knows? Maybe we're never going to go anywhere ever again. I don't know.
Who knows? All right, guys.
Billy Bush there. Hope you enjoyed that. How nice it was to speak to him again. I'd like to thank Billy for his time, and I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It was a bit strange doing it in isolation, but nonetheless, just really nice to see Billy again and believe for a few brief moments that we were both in Los Angeles. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode. Hope you're all right wherever you are, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a rating or review if you get the time. It helps other people find the show. See you next time.